But the Saturday night, all of that disappeared. I was no longer a victim. I was a star. I was a star, and whether it was in my own mind or not, that's really all that mattered, because I think that taught me to be the person that I am today.
I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Drake Jensen is a Canadian country singer who was born and grew up in the tiny Cape Breton Island, which is on the eastern coast of Canada. After coming out, he moved to the nearby city of Moncton, where he discovered Triangles, the only gay bar in town, which closed in 2018 after 25 years of business. We caught up to discuss the straight gentrification of queer bars, why leather is the butch version of drag, and growing up in a small town.
So him and I were basically were Moncton's premier leather couple, and so we were like the leather kings of Moncton. And when we went to the club in leather, I mean, everybody noticed. That's who we were. And on the outside, it was a great relationship. On the inside, it was absolutely horrific. But that was the personal side of it. But the club side of it, we spent a lot of time in that club, and it was just such a good time in my life. I mean, every weekend was a party, and I'm not saying I was a drunk or a drug addict. By far, I was not, and never have been. But I enjoyed myself back then. Let's put it that way. And I was never been into drugs, but it was my first time experiencing marijuana, and I was 36 years old. I'd never smoked a joint in my life. I'd never done any drugs. I drank a bit, but so I discovered marijuana at 36 years old, and I partied a lot. It was a lot of fun. It was nice being the leather superstar of the town. So we went there, and that was my first experience being in a bar where people were completely accepting. You could completely be yourself. You could wear your leather, and nobody really even, people gave you a second look, and that was the best part of it, really. But so I really, really it literally intoxicated me. Like I had been so long that I've been waiting for something, a place that I could go and be myself. I think that was the first time that I ever really felt comfortable in public, because I'm very strange, and as I've gotten older, I'm getting more strange. But I'm an introverted extrovert. So when I'm in public, I'm very extroverted, and when I put myself in that frame of mind, I can be that very fun person. But basically, 90% of me is very introverted. Mm-hmm. So for me to find a place where I felt safe, it gave me a creative license to be the expressive person that I always wanted to be outwardly. And once I found that, it was an addiction. It was just such a fun place. I mean, and it was a mixed crowd. Like we're talking, it was the way the gay community. I always pictured the gay community. I mean, we're so segregated right now. The gay community has subcategorized itself so deeply and sub-labeled itself so deeply at the moment that we're all fighting about who's more relevant at this time. And I really long for it. Here I am, like I'm an old man. I'm 50 years old next month. And I'm sitting here saying, wow, I wish I was back in the olden days when everybody was at the bar and it didn't matter whether you were trans, or it didn't matter whether you were a drag queen, or you were a leather guy, or you were a lesbian, or you were just that quiet gay guy in the corner. Everybody just kind of functioned together and respected each other. That's the kind of bar that Triangles was. Mm-hmm. And I long for that. And even after I moved to Ottawa, so I moved to Ottawa, and then, there was a couple of small bars here. I have never been able to find the acceptance and the comfort level that I did find in that small club underground, basically, because it was in a basement, in Moncton, New Brunswick.
Hmm. And so, can we talk about Moncton? Because can you give me kind of like an idea of like how big it is, like what the...
Moncton was socially disconnected. Moncton has a population of 86,000 people right now.
Uh-huh.
The city is not big, but it had a very, very robust gay community.
Hmm.
Um, and there was a lot of outlying areas. Nova Scotia, of course, was very close. So a lot of gay people from the part of Nova Scotia that's very close to Moncton would migrate. And then there would be people from northern New Brunswick that would migrate down to Moncton. So it was kind of like Moncton was the hub city, I would say, for a lot of people to come and go to the club, because Triangles was one of the most popular clubs in Moncton. There was, I think there might have been one other. I don't even think there was at the time. I think Triangles was the only gay club in Moncton.
Ah, okay.
Um,
So there is that thing that like that small town kind of bar where there's there's no choice but to get along. There's no choice but for everyone to go there because there's not enough of a
oh
population to
yeah,
segregate.
yeah. There was no Black Eagle. Like we didn't because in Canada and the U.S. they have. I don't know whether you're familiar, but for leather people they had the Black Eagle. Um, I find some Black Eagles have been straight gentrified. Now.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, that's
oh
interesting.
yes.
So hang on. So the Black Eagle is like a chain of leather bars. Is that right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can Google that. They're everywhere. They're from all across North America, basically.
So they're
There were.
like the McDonald's of leather bars.
They are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I mean, I think you guys had like in London, the equivalent of what would have been in London will be called a bar called Hoist. I don't know whether you've ever heard of that
Okay,
before.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so Hoist would be the Black Eagle that I would go to when I came to Ottawa. Michael and I we used to go to Montreal, and has a very big gay district, and the bar there would be the Black Eagle, and we would go to Black Eagle, and it would be comparable to the Hoist in London. And I know that the Hoist is probably pretty shady. I have never been there, and I've heard some things, but the Black Eagle used to be
What
the
have you
Black.
heard?
Oh God, I've actually seen a couple of videos. But anyway, but the thing, that Black Eagle was very, very. It was a pretty raw bar back then. I mean, you could go upstairs and watch guys performing sex acts on each other, sitting having a beer. I mean, and now it's become, like I say, straight gentrified, where you go to the Black Eagle now and you've got a bachelorette party with a bunch of girls there. So, oh yeah, that's
Ah.
all. So it's all changed. Like I would never go to the Black Eagle in leather. Like I don't feel comfortable anymore. So you've got this straight gentrification happening all across. But back to Triangles. I mean, Triangles went on for years after I left Moncton,
Mm.
and just recently, actually, it was last year. It closed um, because there was actually a lesbian couple. Edie and Stella were their names, and they
Mm.
owned it and managed it for years. And they were great to the community. I really liked them both, and it was unfortunate, but they wanted to retire. I don't think there was a lack of business because somebody bought it and it's still open under a different name. But they wanted to get out of the business because it's the bar business is a very difficult business these days.
Mm.
Um, with the advent of people not being able to, the drinking and driving, nobody does that anymore, and people are doing, the young gay people are doing and things like that, and going out and drinking water, and so that nobody's drinking beer anymore. So it's difficult to make money as a bar owner, and I understand that. But it was really sad to hear that it was gone.
Mm.
That was probably the best club culture that I had experienced in my life over being like, I came out when I was 27, and of course I've been in gay bars. I was never a big gay bar person. I didn't, until I went to Moncton, because it was just like the bar in Moncton was just it was so cultural, and there was so many different types of people there, and everything was accepted. So it was fun to do that. And I spent basically 3 years going to the club every weekend almost, I think, so
Mm.
it was a lot of fun.
So let me make sure I have all of this correct. So you lived in Cape Breton until you were 34,
Yeah, yes,
and then but you came out when you were 27.
yes.
So what is that like then, living in a really isolated area and coming out?
Well, there's not much, and you got to remember back then. I mean, so I'm 50, so that's 25 years ago, almost. The internet had not been developed to the point where it's at today. We didn't have the connectivity we had, so it was still this very primitive messenger system. It was just mostly website-based stuff that you could search. I mean, I used to search for a lot of things on the internet, and this is how I started to get in contact. This is how I ended up in Moncton. So I started to search for leather because I was always interested in leather. So I always searched for stuff on the internet, and I came across this group, the Mr. Atlantic Canada Leather Group.
Hmm.
And that's how I got to compete in the competition. I went to Moncton to compete in the competition. Actually, I was on TV. There's a big TV series here called Kink, and they filmed 3 seasons, and I was in, I think, the second season in that competition. And that's how I got to Moncton. And so being in that very primitive space, I mean, basically put me onto the internet to search for things that I wasn't really experiencing. Like I would go to the once a month dances, and there was only one other leather guy there, which kind of inspired me to do the same thing. So I got the Sears catalog, and Sears catalog used to have a biker section at that time, and you could order a pair of chaps, you could get a pair of leather pants, you could get a vest, and that was about it. I mean, I didn't know there was leather stores that existed. I had no idea. So it was one of those things. So basically, the internet was my portal to the gateway to getting off the island. And eventually, I was with somebody on the island for a guy for 8 years, and the relationship wasn't really going anywhere. And we both kind of basically came to a point where he was going one way and I was going the other. And I don't mean sexually; I just mean
Hmm.
emotionally,
Hmm.
because I was looking to experience different things like the leather community, and he wasn't interested. So we broke up, and that's when I met somebody. I met somebody at that leather competition,
Hmm.
and interestingly enough, it's funny. So that brought me to Moncton. So it was a very difficult time for me because I was still very, very naive, and I had no idea what I was doing. If I look back on it, I would probably never do it again. But I'm glad I did it. Like I'm not so outwardly public anymore. Like I wouldn't go on stage in a jockstrap anymore. That's not my thing. But in my 30s, it was fine. I'm glad I experienced that. I'm glad I was on a TV show. I mean, I remember getting calls the next day after that competition. People are saying, "You were on Kink." I'm like, "Yeah, what were you doing watching it?" It's just kind of funny that, people are like, "Oh, you were on a dirty TV show." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, you were watching it. So how did you find me?" Because everybody's so inquisitive, but living in that very, it was like being in a cage, you know,
Mm. And
my,
that Sorry. So I mean, the image that people have of Canada, anyone who lives outside, that it's very kind of open and liberal kind of community.
oh
So
no,
no,
no, no,
yeah.
no, no, no.
And so then what was it like coming out at 27?
Horrific. Like really, I'd come out to my mother when I was 15 years old, and she just totally rejected the idea and shut me down, because she didn't want my father to know, and she said you could never tell your father. So I went on for years, and I got married to a woman. I have a very sordid past when it comes to relationships. Um, and so I got married to a woman, and it wasn't until I hit like 26 that I started to realize I can't do this anymore, because everybody at home got married. All the
Mm,
gay people got married at home because it was so oppressive. There was no such thing. I mean, they called the gay cruising area the Fruit Loop. That's what they called it because it was basically a loop that you could drive around. And that was the only place that people would go, and they would make fun of people that went down there. And you were just blacklisted as a homosexual if you were. If
mm,
we had another gay guy in our family, and he was completely the black sheep of our family. So I was the second one to come out in our family. So by the time I came out, the blow had been softened a little bit, pardon the pun. Um, but yeah, it's just, it's you just feel really trapped, and it's not right now. It's liberal, so Cape Breton has a very big gay community. It has an active drag community. It still has those dances, and they have a massive pride every year. But none of that existed. That stuff. We had no resources, no support at all.
So then why, so this might come out the wrong way, so apologies, but why did you then take so long to leave after you came out?
So at 26, at 26, I came out.
Uh-huh.
And I met somebody 6 months after that. I was always a very relationship oriented person. So by this time, so I was 26, this is when the dances started. Things were starting to change a little bit on the island. Um, and like I said, I was one of the two leather people that were on the island. There was only another guy, me and another guy. And so we were quite the anomaly, really. So I was with this guy for 8 years. And I was constantly looking for something in the relationship that he wasn't interested in having, which was the more leather, not so vanilla relationship. And he just didn't want it. And for years, I kind of, went along my merry way. And I was never one to veer outside of a relationship. That's not who I am. Mm-hmm. So it just got to a point basically where him and I just grew completely apart. And that's what motivated me to literally, I packed the car one day and I just left. I just couldn't do it anymore. I'd left all the demons behind. I thought I did anyway. A lot of times you can pack your physical stuff, but your mental baggage comes with you. That's the problem.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it took me years to basically deal with all of the oppression and the self-loathing that I had for myself for years. And I don't have any sexual shame or anything. I don't know whether you've noticed or any of my media, but, I did a Bear magazine cover in complete, leather. And for me, a lot of people in the music community, of course, I'm in country, sort of country now. I'm more rock country now. But kind of appall people. And it kind of, again, it caused people to veer away from me because they didn't accept that. I've always been pretty sexually open. So I believe that we're all inertly sexual people, and everybody, this is how we function, whether they acknowledge it or not. I've just always been one to acknowledge it. I'm not ashamed of it, of who I am sexually. And so it was very difficult again. When I came out in country music, I kind of set myself up for another, good dose of oppression. It seems like I'm a sucker for punishment.
So before you left, had you been to the Moncton, like had you been on the scene in Moncton, or was this like a brand new world? You moved there?
It was literally, I went for the competition. And I was still living in Cape Breton. I went for the competition, and that basically was a game changer for me. I met a whole bunch of people that were just like me. So suddenly I met my tribe, and I come back home, and I'm still with my partner, and I just fell into a depression because I had such a great weekend with all of them, and I felt like I had basically found my tribe, and now I was removed 6 hours away from them again. And like I said, we didn't have WhatsApp. We didn't have Facebook Messenger back then. There was none of that. So keeping in contact with people was email. And I just made the decision that I wanted to change. And that's basically when I fled. And I'll call it fleeing because that's what I did.
Like middle of the night, packing up everything.
Well, I remember I had a Toyota Echo. I bought a Toyota Echo. And I don't know whether you know what that is, but it's a very small subcompact car. And I jammed everything I possibly could into that car that I owned, and I left. And looking back on it, it was probably the most courageous thing I've ever done. And inevitably, it's what brought me to where I am today. It got me to Ottawa. It brought Michael and I together. It spawned my music career. It was all meant to happen. It was just all part of a very large plan, really, when I look back on it.
So let us get back to triangles.
Yeah.
I'm taking you every which way. Tell me about a typical Saturday night.
Oh God. So we would, so my boyfriend and I would usually have a couple of our other leather friends over. We would get dressed, we would roll a joint, smoke a joint, and have a beer, and then we would, get a cab downtown. It was like 10 minutes away from where we lived. And, go down over the stairs. And I remember going down over the stairs, and my boyfriend was very well built, and, he was very well known in the community as one of the premier leather people in the community. Of course, I was like Princess Diana. I was by kind of by fault. I married into that. So I married into the leather royalty, and so I would follow him down over the stairs, and everybody would turn and look. It was it was one of those things. It was the biggest embellishment of vanity that I think I ever partook in. Um, and I enjoyed every minute of it, because you have to remember, coming from a oppressed community where everybody hated who you were,
Mm,
suddenly, I was like
the shit.
dressing, yeah, like I was the thing, like I
Yeah.
was, and then I went on to win the Mr. Moncton leather competition, and then I went on to win the Mr. Atlantic Canada leather competition, and then everybody knew who I was. And so that was a very big thing. But the typical Saturday night, yeah, down over the stairs. Of course, there was no coat check for us because we weren't wearing very much as it was. Um, and we would, go to the bar and talk to everybody that was there, because all of our friends would be there. And, then we'd proceed to the dance floor. We danced the whole night. You know, that was the typical, I call it small town, big city kind of Saturday night.
Mm. And so
You know,
what music could you expect to hear?
Oh God, like at that time it was CNC Music Factory and Black Box and all of those things. I mean, it's the Roland TR-808 reprisal, if you know what I mean. Like everything was based around the Roland TR-808 drum machine at that time, and every beat was like TR-808 drum machine, synthesizer bass. I mean, it was all kinds of, that stuff. And I was always one more for the, Human League, and I loved Stevie Nicks and Duran Duran, and I'm a huge British wave fan,
Mm.
Culture Club and things like that. I always wanted to hear that stuff, and I'd go ask the DJ, and she'd look at me and she says, "Too slow, I can't play that." Um, but I remember, one night I finally convinced her to play Stevie Nicks' "Stand Back," and everybody danced. I mean, I think, musical trends sometimes set themselves, they solidify themselves in decades of, we can, basically follow musical trends as though this was the electro, and this was the British invasion. But at that time it was all dance music, CNC Music Factory, Black Box, Milli Vanilli, all of that stuff, Vanilla Ice. I mean, that's what they were playing back then, and I absolutely couldn't stand it. So I'd go and I'd dance anyway. I mean, I wasn't going to be, the old guy standing on the side, that's for sure, because I was still young. Um, but yeah, I had a blast. I mean, it didn't matter. I mean, there was a beat, and everybody was having fun, and there was no animosity. I mean, those were literally the good old days.
And so on other nights, like, so was it always dance music, or was there other
Oh
things going on?
no! I mean, Stella and Evie would have shows there. They would bring in the occasional musician. Um, they had a great karaoke night, a really, really great karaoke night, and that's where I started singing again.
And your karaoke song of choice is?
Um, so I would karaoke with this girl, and she could have been a professional singer. Her name escapes me. It's been 15, 16 years now. But her and I would do Tim McGraw and Faith Hill. I mean, I would do Barry Manilow, because I loved Barry Manilow. My music taste I have a very broad spectrum. When somebody talks music to me, it's either music that I like or music that I don't like. I'm not a genre based. I don't have genre based affection syndrome, is what I call it. I I like everything, and so her and I would do country, or I would do Barry Manilow, and I just loved music, and I started to sing again because I'd stopped singing. I used to play in bands in Cape Breton Island. I was in a club band. So we would do like, current radio covers, and I played in all the bars in Cape Breton, straight bars, of course. And, I stopped doing that eventually, and that's when I moved off the island, but I stopped singing.
Mm.
And the karaoke at Triangles kind of, in a strange way, helped me reinvent myself. And I started singing more country at that time, and it was very well received. So this kind of spawned my music career again also. So I owe it. That's why when you asked me about talking about this, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Because there's so much of the Triangles was my Blitz club. That's what it was. So if you could really parallel it to something, it was my Blitz club. That I have the exact same experience, with that as like Princess Julia described at the Blitz, right? So I can totally identify, because Triangles meant so much to me. It was so much a part of who I was socially, and so much a part of who I identified myself with as a gay man.
So you talked about the owners before,
Yeah.
Edie and I got it.
Stella,
Edie
and
and
Stella. Yeah.
Just describe them to me.
They were your typical. Oh my God, I'm going to sound terrible. They were your typical lesbian couple.
So what does that mean? Cats, dungarees?
I don't know if they had cats or not, but I mean they were very normal. Like that's what I find about. I'm going to be terrible. That's what I find about lesbians. Lesbians are like so much more level-headed sometimes. I don't know. They were just very, very laid back and normal people, just trying to make a living, and it was probably tough for them at times because, people stopped drinking a lot because they couldn't drink and drive. And of course, people came from outer-lying areas that would drive down and they couldn't do that anymore. So I know that there was one point that they were losing a lot of money, and I'm sure they struggled, but they always kept it open. They always had events. They always were inclusive to everybody. They always had the nicest bartenders. I mean, they were people you could identify with. They were very normal people, and there was nothing over the top with either one of them. They were just really nice people. I have very good memories of that time, and they were pillars in the community because that bar was the infrastructure of who we were socially. In a strange way, I owe an awful lot to Stella and Evie, because of them having that bar.
And so, do you remember your first time going there?
My first time I remember walking in there, and it was probably it was right after the leather competition. Yeah. And I went in leather, and of course, you would walk down the stairs, and as soon as you hit down the stairs, there was somebody always in the coat booth there, and on the right side, there was a huge bar, and beyond that, there was like a patio that you could go outside. And then on the left side was a very kind of dark area in the back where everybody would sit down, and then there was a huge dance floor on the left side, and a big DJ booth, and there was a huge stage also because they used to have karaoke there, and I actually started singing again at Triangle. So it kind of spawned me back into singing because I had stopped singing for a long time. So I would do karaoke there on Thursday nights and go there on Saturday nights for the big night. And they would have a leather night once a month. So we would always get, decked out in our gear and go. And it was a big thing. It was like getting ready for the ball. I've often compared leather to the male butch version of drag, and I still feel that way about it. And it was just a real fun time. It was a great time. The relationship I was in at that time in Moncton wasn't great, but my social life and my friends I had, and the how I became cultured as a gay man was invaluable.
Can we just talk about what you've just said about dressing in leather as being the butch version of drag? What does it feel like when you're dressing that way?
So a lot of people have asked me because one of my music videos, I made the very interesting choice, and you can go back and watch it if you haven't already. I did a song about bullying, and the song was called Scars, and I did the video decked in that full leather that I would basically wear to the club. And a lot of people, when they watched the video, had a very negative reaction to it. Number one, I kind of look like, this massive leather soldier, evil leather soldier. But if you read into it and you listen to the words of the song, I mean, had a really rough time in the small town, Cape Breton, and I grew up battered as a child because I was, called a fag and a queer and beat up at school and picked on by teachers. It was really a nightmare. So leather for me when I discovered leather was a representation of strength for me. Mm-hmm. So let's get serious for a moment. And I know a lot of people associate leather with kink and sex. And of course, 50 Shades of Grey has, exasperated that. But the thing is that for me, it meant something completely different. If you look into the leather community, you'll probably find a lot of people that were bullied like me, that were picked on and made to feel little. When you discover leather, and I discovered this tribe of people that were like me, there was an empowerment in it. And it's kind of like being in a biker club. And it's interesting because that's where the leather community actually did spawn from, was from the post-war veterans that got bikes and, of course, were gay. And that's where the whole thing spawned from. But so when I wore leather, that experience of embellishing myself with leather clothing, and I was never one to be a complete exhibitionist. I always wore leather jackets and leather pants, and I wasn't one to go to the bar in my underwear. That's not who I was. So I was always dressed in leather. I had leather shirts, and that's just what I did. I was into denim and leather. But when I did that, there was a sense of empowerment to it, because it was like I was joining with all of the other people that had experienced things that were much the same as what I experienced. So it was kind of a show of strength. And it was a feeling of empowerment. So when I created the Scars video about bullying, it was only natural for me to dress like that, because that is what liberated me. It helped liberate my soul from that oppression. So that was a very big part of my life. And even today still is. I mean, I don't go out to the club every weekend anymore. I'm not that person anymore. Very private, stay home, work on music. I have a very small social circle of friends. Some of them are into leather. Most of my leather interaction is online now with other leather men and leather women. But it's still good. It's a different stage of life. I still have all of my leather in my closet. And when we go to Montreal, I'll deck out in leather, and I'll go to the club in Montreal. There's a club called Le Stud, which is it's a French name, of course. But it's a very masculine, heavy club. And I still enjoy that.
Do you remember hearing that it was closing?
Yeah. So Stella, I follow her. Of course, we're friends online. Stella and I were the ones, we talked a little more, and she was involved with Pride, and of course she knew my partner. And yeah, when she put it up, I remember it really touching me that she was closing it, that they were closing it. They were tired. I think they wanted to retire. I could, because it remained open. It's under a different name, which is blasphemous to me. But yeah, it remained open. I mean, when they, and another friend of mine that I used to see there all the time, he sent me a message and said, "Oh, they're closing the club." I'm like, oh God, it was like a death. I remember feeling like it was some type of death. It would be always something that you could never go back to. I mean, I'd be interested to go back. It's never the same when somebody takes over a club. I think things change inevitably. If it's the same space, I think ownership, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, inevitably changes it's change or die. But I mean, inevitably, it never ever is the same. I would be interesting. Once in a while, I'll stop in Moncton. Sometime I'd like to go and spend a night and go back there and just see what's left there and what it has become. I mean, I'm always open to new things. I think that's how you stay young. And I would like to see, what's happening there now. It's been years since I've been back there, but like I said, it's been responsible for so much of who I've become as an artist, and it spawned my music career again. And I owe it so much. I had such a bad childhood growing up in small town Glace Bay back on Cape Breton Island that by the time I had gotten to Moncton and basically the wild child, the one that, used to embellish himself in the bathroom with the Sears catalog with the Leathermen, once he got loose, I think there could have been nothing that could have ever spoiled, no matter what came up. And there was some drama. Of course, there always is drama. I mean, what is the gay community without drama? I mean, we are literally one of the most best living soap operas on the face of the planet. But even the small things that would come up or the bad relationship I was in, none of that could overshadow the fact that I was free. Like, none of it. It was just such a positive experience for me, despite the negative. So I think that I can only tell you that it was probably one of the best times of my life.
Did you ever go to Triangles? Well, if you did, I would love to hear from you. Tell me your stories and share any of the photos or anecdotes that you have through social media. You can reach me through Instagram and Twitter and all those other places with the username KAndersonMusic. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single from the set, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right now on all streaming platforms. If you like this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told someone who you think might be interested about its very existence. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.